So I have a spooky story for you, and this one features a camera. Now we've all heard of postmortem photography. This was a sensation that was very popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where families would take photographs of their deceased loved ones. These photos would often be the last opportunity that a family had to be with their loved ones before they were buried. So they were very commonplace, very expensive, but that's not really the focus of this story. This story centers on two amateur photographers who are also avid thrifters. Now, one of the things that they've been doing is trying to go to antique stores in their area to see if they can find old cameras, because that's something that the two of them enjoy collecting. Now, our two amateur photographers go from thrift shop to antique shop to antique shop, trying to find these old cameras. And every single time they go to a store, they strike out. So they eventually get to a point where they're about to give up, but one of them convinces the other to drive a little bit out of the area that they're in. They make the 3-hour drive, and eventually they get to this antique shop. Now, this antique shop has a very arresting presence. As soon as they drive up to it, they're automatically stunned by the building that they're looking at. Now, the sign is a pretty simple sign. Outside it says antiques and oddities, and they decide to try their luck. The two men park their cars and they walk inside this beautiful ornate building, and they get inside the lobby of this antique shop, and it's expansive. In fact, it's shockingly much bigger inside than it looks on the outside. They're greeted by an old man who works at the store. He seems kind of whimsical in nature, and he asks the two men what they're looking for. The two men say they're looking for cameras. The old man has a whole array of them from all different ages, the 1880s through the 1980s, and some a little bit more modern if they're willing to pay the price for it. But the two men are mesmerized by the selection. Now, all of the cameras there are pretty pricey because they're old cameras. In fact, it's strange that a collector didn't come there sooner, because some of these cameras had to be valued in the tens of thousands of dollar range. They were that rare. As the men were making their final decision, one of them looked up, realizing that the entire time they had been in the store, they had been transfixed on just this one area. But taking a break from that moment, he realized that this store was expansive, as he noticed when he first walked in. But he had never taken a moment to really focus on the other objects that were in the store. Books, telephones, dolls that sat creepily but in immaculate condition, other knickknacks like bikes. And in the distance, he saw a door. Now, this door was closed, but it piqued his interest, so he called the shop owner back over and he asked him what was behind it. The shop owner simply replied, "Oddities." Now, the man was curious at this point, so he asked the shop owner if he could go and look. The shop owner hesitantly led him back to the door, and as he opened it up, the man was amazed. What he saw in there was a labyrinth of different items. Oddities indeed, but some of the oddities seemed to be more ordinary in nature. A telephone that mysteriously rang despite not being plugged in. But the thing that really caught his eye was a camera, much like this one. Now, the man asked the shop owner why this camera was kept in the oddities room along with these other items instead of out on the floor with the rest of the cameras. The shop owner replied, "This camera is unlike the rest." Now, of course, the man had to know why, so the shop owner explained that this camera seems to work on its own. There would be days where he would come in the shop and there would just be flashes of light towards the back of the store, only in the area where this camera was located. Nothing else in the area could have caused the flashes. There would be times where the shop owner would also come in and see shadows moving across the wall in the area where the camera had flashed. Seeing this was more than enough for him to isolate the camera, along with the other items that had similar things happening around them. After hearing the story, the man chuckled and asked the shop owner how much the camera was. The shop owner offered it to him for free under the condition that he never bring it back. The two men, after hearing that they could get this camera for free, were thrilled. They couldn't believe their luck. So they ushered themselves out of the store along with the camera, they safely packaged it up, and they headed back home. The entire way, though, there was this feeling of unease in the car with them. They finally got home, and the two men decided to unpack the camera and play around with it. They would definitely need some supplies to get it in working condition. That way, if they wanted to process the photographs they took, they could do that. And it was a good thing that they got the camera for free, because that equipment was going to be super expensive, because they would need to find it, one, and two, they would need to pay the premium for it. But besides that, again, the two men couldn't believe the good luck they had had that day. But that was until about a week later. They had intended to go back to see if they could find some of the supplies that would support this camera, but when they typed the search into Google, there was no trace of this store. They had both been in it though, but Alas, the only evidence they had of their trip was this camera. Now, the first week the two men had the camera at their apartment, there wasn't really much going on, but it definitely felt heavier than it did before they got the camera there. However, after about week 1, strange things started to occur. The men would see shadows moving in the background and report hearing disembodied voices. They would also eerily report seeing flashes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of the day, really at all times of the day. Now, the camera was in a room by itself. This is a 3-bedroom apartment, 2 men living there, but they would see this massive flash happening in this room where the camera was located, just like the shop owner reported. But to make matters even worse, sometimes these disembodied voices would sound like wails, people crying in pure agony. And periodically, the furniture in the room with the camera would be in different positions, and none of it could be explained. Now, the 2 men were really curious about the camera and its origins. They had never experienced anything like this with any of the cameras they had bought in the past. Whether they were old or new, it didn't matter. But this camera here obviously came with a history. So the 2 men tried to go find the shop, but again, like I mentioned, there was no evidence of that store existing, so they decided to take another road trip. They followed the exact directions that they had taken the first time to get to this antique store, but when they arrived at the location, it was completely different. There was a parking lot. There was in fact a number of stores there, but the antique shop they were looking for, the one with the arresting presence, the one with the gorgeous brick outside, was replaced by a shopping mall. So the men decided that they would go from store to store to try to figure out what exactly happened and if they were even in the right area. Now, the men went into a couple of stores, and every time they went in, none of the business owners or the patrons seemed to know what they were talking about. And it got to a point where after going to several stores, people started to notice, and they were about to get the cops called on them. They decided they would try their luck one more time, and they went into the final store. Now, this final store had the same general layout as the antique shop, but it was completely refurbished on the inside. A law office now. The man looked around, and in the back corner, much like he had seen in the original store, there was a door. As he walked in, he went up to the receptionist, who appeared to be puzzled, and she asked if they had an appointment with the lawyer who was in. Of course, they did not, but they were curious, so they started asking questions. They asked if this building had been anything else before. The receptionist looked at them confused and asked them, like, what? The 2 men reported that they had been here one time before and that it was an antique shop. Upon hearing this, the receptionist's expression changed completely. Initially confused and a little alarmed, a different expression now took its place. That's when she nodded her head understandingly. She told the 2 men to wait just a moment, and she phoned back to the attorney. The attorney was the one who owned the building. As he came out to greet the 2 men, he asked them to come back to his office. The 2 men nervously followed him back to his office, and the attorney asked them to sit down. Now, as they sat down, the attorney looked at them amused, and he explained that yes, at one point in the past, his father's grandfather, so his great-great-grandfather, used to own the building that they were in. He pulled out a stack of photos from the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the building was booming. And in the photo, you could see the shop owner that they had met the first time they had went to the antique store. "That's my grandfather," the attorney said. And yes, he used to own a store full of knickknacks and eclectic items, and that was what he was known for. And the attorney explained that this wouldn't be the first time he had gotten people in there looking for an antique shop, but everyone who came back to look for the store meant to return an item they should have never bought in the first place. The men exchanged glances with each other now. Like what? "Oh, haunted dolls," the attorney said. "Books that open and close on their own, relics that really should have never seen the light of day, you know, the light." And as the 2 men were listening to the attorney talk about these items and the people who tried to return them, they got chills at the same time. "Well, why did they try to return the items?" he asked. "Again, like I told you," the attorney said, "they should have never had them in the first place." So the 2 men told him about the camera. "Ah, the camera," the attorney said. "That's one of those items that's been returned a couple of times throughout my lifetime. Much more when I was younger, less so now that I'm older. Do you know the history?" he asked the men. The 2 men shook their heads and said no. And that's when the attorney explained that that camera that they had purchased was a post-mortem camera, one used to take photography of those deceased. The 2 men shared an intense chill between them. "So you're saying this camera that we bought, this collectible, this antique camera, was used to take pictures of the dead?" "Well, yeah, that's what post-mortem means," the attorney said. "And that's the type of camera you bought. This camera has seen the deaths of many people over the course of some years." Upon hearing this, the 2 men decided they had had enough, and they were kind of scared, so they went back home. That night, the two men made an agreement to get rid of the camera. So they walked into the room where the camera was located with the intention of driving right back down to the store, dropping it off at the attorney's office, and getting the hell out of Dodge. But as the two men were messing with the camera, it started flashing repeatedly, over and over again. They saw shadows on the walls, stuff started to move in the room, and as they both got in front of the lens, a blast shone in front of their face, blinding the both of them, brighter than either one had ever seen. And after experiencing that, one of the men panicked. He scooped up the camera, rushed downstairs, threw it in the back of his car, and decided he was getting rid of that thing tonight. But sadly, he would never return. On the way back to the antique store that never existed, he crashed and sadly passed away. Now, a few weeks later, following the death of his roommate and friend, the man decided to leave the apartment. He was in the process of moving out when he received a package in the mail. The package was from the attorney's office, and it was quite heavy in a manila envelope that said fragile. Curious, the man took a moment from moving to sit down and open the package. And inside, he saw a small note from the attorney. "Got your camera back. Thought you might want to see this." And sitting in front of him was a stack of photos. None he had ever seen, none he had ever taken, and certainly didn't send to the attorney's office. But yet, sitting in front of him, there were photos from inside the apartment. So the man sat down and started to go through each photo. A photo of a wall, a picture of the desk, a photo from when the camera fell over, a photo of a random boot, a photo of a shadow on the wall, a photo of a woman in black, a photo of a family of 3, a photo of a child that they had never seen before, all looking like they were peacefully sleeping. And after looking through all of the photos, a chill ran down his spine as he looked at the last few. In one of the photos, he saw him and his friend the night that they were trying to get rid of the camera. In fact, there were a couple of photos of the friends before that day, but this one was by far the worst. Sitting right next to each other, both with their eyes closed, was a picture of his friend and a picture of him, both presumably dead. And that's when his hand started to tremble as he slowly turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, was a birth and death date, and the name underneath it was the same name as his roommates. Anyways, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about this story. Let me know if you like it. What do you think happened with the antique shop? Did it ever exist? Were the two men on some sort of acid trip? What do you think about the camera and the room full of oddities? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in my next video.